The fantasy football offseason is gearing up, and for many of you, draft season is about to be underway. For us, draft season has been happening all summer long over on Underdog Fantasy, and there are some players we are avoiding like the plague. Today, I'm joined by friend of the channel, Ron Stewart, as we go through the players we view as must-avoids at their current ADPs over on Underdog Fantasy. But before we get into it, as always, Ron, how you doing today, brother?
Doing great, jacked up. I think I saw before I hopped in here, I saw like a Brian Dawkins cut up on TikTok. I'm ready to run through a wall. He's like talking to himself. He's like, the time has come. The time has come. So I'm down. The time has come for me to talk about my fades in fantasy football today.
Is there? But before we get into it, as always, y'all know what we got to do. Let's hit the damn intro. All right, starting off with the first player I am avoiding over on Underdog Fantasy right now, and that is going to be the first running back off the board on Underdog Fantasy, Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers. Going off the board, like I mentioned, running back 1 overall, 3rd overall player off the board in fantasy drafts right now. And it really seems fitting that in the last video we just did, you guys would have watched on Saturday, that Elijah Mitchell was one of the players that I can't stop drafting, considering CMC is a full fade for me on the other side, given the opportunity cost right now. And the reason being is that when those two shared the field together last year, we did see both McCaffrey's workload and overall fantasy points per game face a sharp decline. We saw 21 PPR points per game with Elijah Mitchell out of the lineup once he came back to San Francisco 49ers. That is also excluding the game that they played against the Kansas City Chiefs for reference. 14.73 PPR points per game in the stretch with Elijah Mitchell. In the games where Elijah Mitchell suited up in the 49ers lineup, Christian McCaffrey went from 25 opportunities per game in the 6 games without Elijah Mitchell to only 17 opportunities per game in the 3 with Elijah Mitchell, including, like I mentioned in the last video, the same role for Elijah Mitchell in the playoff run. Elijah Mitchell was averaging about, 12, 13 opportunities per game in the 2 playoff games he shared the field with Christian McCaffrey last year. He's still that elite talent that's going to receive elite receiving work on a very good offense, but I just truly question the intentions of what Kyle Shanahan really has planned with this offense. I think he's going to want to keep a fresh rotation between 2 very efficient backs with both Mitchell and CMC. And while I think his bottom line for 2023 will probably reside in between that range of his 21 PPR points per game he scored last year and the 14.73 output with Elijah Mitchell, I think he mostly projects for like that 18 to 18.5 PPR points per game range, which if that's the case, I simply don't think is enough upside for me to pass on the crystal clear projections of the wide receivers in this range. Because obviously the risk, 27-year-old running back, workload underhand, there's obviously going to be risk with taking McCaffrey up high. If he still had that, 22, 23 elite league winning level ceiling, I'd be fine with taking that opportunity cost. But when you got guys like Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs with such clear-cut projections for me this year as potential 20-plus PPR point per game wide receivers, I find it tough to pull the trigger on Christian McCaffrey, on top of the fact that he's not even my running back 1. Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons is currently my ranked running back 1, and he currently goes off the board on Underdog Fantasy 6 spots after where Christian McCaffrey's ADP lies right now. So, yeah, for me, Christian McCaffrey is someone I can't pull the trigger with.
Yeah, I'm not drafting, I'm not overweight on McCaffrey. I'm at 7%, I check. So I take him once the top 4 wide receivers are gone. I guess kind of just how the draft room goes, just because sometimes you can get I kind of think the 6 spot's just ugly. We'll talk about in a little bit the tight ends who goes there. You got, Diggs isn't bad, but you can get Diggs at 9 sometimes. So sometimes just in terms of playing the ADP game. But I do agree. I think really the upside case for McCaffrey is it's almost like the reverse of Elijah Mitchell, where Elijah Mitchell would almost have to go down for McCaffrey to see 21, 22, 23 points per game, which you can bake into the upside, but you don't want the contingent upside to hinge on an injury in round 1. But the player I'm not drafting, also a guy who's going high, Devonta Smith. And it's tough here because we're taking Devonta Smith as a mid-second right now. And I just think he's sort of maxed out in terms of what he can be in fantasy football. This is not a team that's going to pass the ball at a league high rate, even being I believe they were top 10, top 15 in passer over expectation last year, still just 23rd. Jalen Hurts is going to convert a lot of those dropbacks into rush attempts, and you get A.J. Brown in this offense had a 29% target share. Devonta Smith still had a 27% target share last year, and he was still, just hovering in the wide receiver 12, 15 point per game area. And if you go into a draft and you take a wide receiver in the 2nd round, and 15 points per game is really all the upside case is there, you're not going to really be happy with that pick. I see a lot of guys I don't really see a huge difference between Devonta Smith and like Debo and Calvin Ridley in that next round. Like the second round to me isn't for those safe wide receiver plays. I would rather shoot for upside with your, Pollards and Saquons and JTs. And that's where I'm getting my running back exposure in, where Devonta Smith is going. So I can't really get there. I think as well, like the second round is really where things sort of converge with running backs versus wide receivers. We've seen in leagues years past where running backs are busting at a high rate in those first 3 rounds, but it actually kind of comes pretty close in second round, running back bust rates versus wide receiver bust rates. So I'll let somebody else take Devonta Smith. Again, we were all over him last year, 6th round guy. He was on some of my best teams last year. But now this Philadelphia Eagles offense is priced all the way up. And unless if they really crank up the passing volume, which is tough to see, unless if like maybe the offense takes a step back or something, or the defense takes a step back, it's just really tough to kind of find a way for Devonta Smith to get to like difference making area where you're taking him.
Yeah, I completely agree when it comes to Devonta Smith. And I before everybody in the comment section is like, of course, the Cowboys fan agrees that the Philadelphia Eagles are overpriced in fantasy. I have AJ Brown as my 14th overall player. I have Devonta Smith as my 31st overall player, simply because, like you said, I expect the efficiency is going to be there. I expect Jalen Hurts is going to be an efficient quarterback. The offense is going to run smoothly. They're probably going to push, top 3, top 5 level efficiency in the league. But I just can't get past the fact that the target competition does exist, and that this team, from a pure pass volume standpoint, is probably not going to top maybe 550 pass attempts, even if you're optimistic that Jalen Hurts builds from a pure raw passing standpoint from last year. It's simply just tough to project him for over 145 targets. And with the presence of AJ Brown, of course, being there, that his ceiling is capped. Like for me personally, if I'm talking about the wide receiver 2s going in this range, I would much rather take a shot on a guy like T. Higgins, because we know inherently that Jamar Chase is going to be the wide receiver 1 there, but even on a sub 23% target share last year, when he was fully healthy, he was averaging 18 PPR points per game. We know Joe Burrow's going to throw the ball 650 plus times if both those guys are healthy. So just at cost, give me T. Higgins straight up over Devonta Smith right now in ADP. I have T. Higgins as 26th overall player. I have Devonta Smith as my 31st overall player. So I feel like we can move on to the next player in this range, another wide receiver going in that, mid-3rd round type of area. It's going to be DK Metcalf for the Seattle Seahawks, going off the board as a wide receiver 15 right now, 28th overall player in ADP. And this is just simply a cost thing for me. He's been outproduced in fantasy football each of the last 3 years by Tyler Lockett. And now as the single best wide receiver at commanding targets in the entire draft to play that Amon-Ra St. Brown role for this offense, expecting this raw target share obviously to decrease with the presence of another wide receiver capable of earning targets. And I also expect a more balanced offensive attack. Last year, when Rashad Penny went down, the only ball carrier they had that they could trust fully was Kenneth Walker. They go out this offseason, they invest a 2nd round pick on a back that can contribute in passing downs, contribute on the goal line, contribute between the tackles when it comes to Zach Charbonnet, that it feels like taking DK is just hoping he returns, back end wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2 value. That I'd rather just guys in this range with higher ceilings. Give me a guy like Calvin Ridley, who could be the wide receiver 1 on a much improved offense with Jacksonville. We talked about him last video. Give me even Amari Cooper, who, despite inconsistencies in his career, is tied to Deshaun Watson, is tied to being the number 1 weapon on, again, a much improved offense with what I expect with Cleveland. And even a guy like Jerry Jeudy, what he was able to do at the back end of last year in a potentially improved Broncos offense, I would rather take the swing on that over DK Metcalf right now. He's a great real-life player. Of course, I love watching DK Metcalf, this big beast, 4.3 speed, 6'4", 230-pound wide receiver play football. He's a lot of fun to watch, but why wouldn't I just wait at round 3 price tags where I can get Lockett and JSN at round 6 price tags?
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the sort of trade-off with Metcalf, is if you want a piece of this offense, you can get a lot of the pieces later on. I'm mixing in Metcalf a little bit because he is that guy. Like, it is a bet on talent in a way, but I agree. Like, he's going on underdog, like early 3rd. Like, to me, I'm still taking Debo. Give me Ridley. I think I would probably take him over like that Jeudy range, and I don't love Amari Cooper. But right. Like Metcalf, I agree. Like, it's tough. Like, we're now 4 years in. I mean, he's cracked the top 12 once. Like, he's a good talent, but you can just make better bets in this offense later. I think he's somebody that you can kind of mix in here and there, but I agree. Like, I'm also underweight on Metcalf. Now, another player that I'm fading is also on the Seahawks offense, Kenneth Walker. And we had the concerns coming in that he did not catch passes in school. He comes in, and he does not catch passes. 1.8 receptions per game, 50th in the NFL last year. It just wasn't good. And then the issue is that they bring in Zach Charbonnet. So now you have a legit running back where we're chasing, right? Kenneth Walker's a 5th round pick, going kind of in the dead zone area. And we want to chase high value touches, right? We want receptions. We want goal line looks. And I think Charbonnet was brought in to take those away from Kenneth Walker, where Zach Charbonnet is kind of like a David Montgomery, James Conner, where he takes what's blocked and he catches passes. So I think in the long down and distance stuff, we're going to see Charbonnet. And Kenneth Walker had one of the league's worst success rates last year, where he's this boom bust runner. And you have to imagine like Pete Carroll, kind of a boomer. In short yard situations, you just want a guy who picks up the yards that are blocked, right? And that's not Kenneth Walker. You don't need to bang him in there on 3rd and 2. That's probably Zach Charbonnet, right? He's 6'1", 214. He's a little bit bigger than Kenneth Walker. So I think we're going to see Charbonnet mix in as kind of the goal line back and catch passes. And when you kind of take that into account, Kenneth Walker kind of looks like Miles Sanders last year, who was like a back-end RB2, like 1,200 yards. Like he had like 1,200 rushing yards, like 12 touchdowns, and it still wasn't enough because he didn't catch passes. So with Kenneth Walker, it just feels like he's kind of the between the 20s guys in this offense. We talked about it last time, like, Damian Harris versus Ramondre Stevenson. It's not quite that, because I think Kenneth Walker has more juice than a Damian Harris, but it's a similar role within this offense that I don't really want to pay a premium for.
No, I completely understand that. Like, you're hoping it becomes a, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt situation of pass if you are the Kenneth Walker drafter, which I'm a little bit more favorable on his talent. I feel like he could potentially be that efficient between the tackles runner for the team. So I have mixed in some 5th round, but I do agree that the ceiling is capped with the presence of another back I deemed as a day 2 worthy type of back with Zach Charbonnet, a guy who's shown he can handle a workload, shown he can handle 3rd down opportunity, can pass block very well, can earn those snaps, can earn the trust of the coaching staff. So I do agree that the committee there is enough to be, wary of him at that current price tag. Another running back going in that 5th round range, a price tag that I just simply think is the prototypical dead zone running back. RB18, 59th overall. We got Alexander Mattison, Minnesota Vikings running back. And like I said, he is the prototypical dead zone running back. Projection models will absolutely love him. Dalvin Cook's out of the fold, but I do think the upside is capped simply because he's such an inefficient plotter on a good offense. He'll maybe carry value if he punches in double-digit touchdowns, but it really seems like I hate making this comparison, but it seems like a similar case to what we were betting on from like Ezekiel Elliott in 2021, where good offense, maybe punches in some touchdowns, but you can't expect, 4.7 yards per carry, very efficient back. I feel like that's what Alexander Mattison represents. He looks like a value, of course, for a lot of people, given that touch competition in the backfield, but you're taking him over legit needle movers at the other positions in this range. You're taking him over your Justin Herberts at quarterback, your potential George Kittles, Kyle Pittses, even TJ Hawkinson. I'm not even a big fan of, but I'd rather a guy like that over what Alexander Mattison represents in this exact same offense. Combine that with the fact that you could just take this same archetype of running back, this inefficient plotter that'll get a lot of volume, with a guy like James Conner 2 or 3 rounds later. So why would I pay the premium on Alexander Mattison, who's shown really next to nothing from a pure efficiency talent standpoint, for me to believe in him as this main RB1, when I can get James Conner, who's already proven it in the past, 2 or 3 rounds later? Combine that with the fact that if I'm going to take a running back in this range, I want to back with that elite efficiency upside on what should be a very, very good offense, potentially even a better offense with Baltimore. Give me J.K. Dobbins if I'm going to be taking a running back in round 5. Give me a runner who's shown that he could be Alvin Kamara-like, prime Alvin Kamara-like in terms of efficiency on a touch-per-touch basis. J.K. Dobbins can do that. So for me, Dobbins over Mattison straight up, Connor at cost over J.K. Dobbins over Alexander Mattison, and of course, all of these onesies and wide receivers that are going in this 5th round area over Alexander Mattison.
Yeah, and you have to take JSN and Tyler Lockett. You have to take Mattison over JSN and Tyler Lockett, something that
gross.
I don't have the stomach for. And something that I found interesting is the thing that really scares me with Mattison, man, is that he's a day 2 running back. And of course, he's been behind Dalvin Cook, but when you get drafted that early and you can't get on the field and command production, it's a tough look. Like, I was looking through, I've been cheesing around with this StatHead subscription where you can just like find crazy queries or whatever. Running backs drafted day 2 since 2000 with less than 40 rushing yards per game. Alexander Mattison had 28.3 yards per game, rushing yards per game over his first 4 seasons. The guys on this list, we're talking Ronald Jones, Ronnie Hillman, TJ Yeldon, Kenyon Drake, Kerryon Johnson, Terrell Henderson, Amir Abdul, there is Christine Michael. There's nothing on this list. Bernard Pierce, there is nothing on this list that is very inspiring. If you don't command volume early, you probably don't ever. And then he's also getting, squeezed on both sides, where Dwayne McBride's probably a as good, if not better, pure between the tackles runner than him, Ty Chandler in the passing game. So he's getting squeezed from all directions. It's tough. It's a projection play. Reminds me a ton of, I wouldn't say like Mike Davis, but, you know, those type of guys like Thomas Rawls and those names that just like, you know, give me nightmares when I think back to those years. I have a similar dead zone running back here, Miles Sanders, who I'm not taking a lot of. And he's also just a very clear, like, oh my God, Miles Sanders, he's going to be the 3-down workhorse on this Carolina Panthers team. It's like, the Panthers offense is going to be pretty bad this year, man. Like, they have a rookie quarterback. I like Bryce Young, but like his targets this year are what, like Thielen, Terrace Marshall. They took DJ Moore from him, like Hayden Hurst. Like, it's not great. Like, I guess DJ Chark is there, but it's not a great offense. They're not going to move Mingo. They're not going to move the ball a ton. Like, it's going to be a pretty ugly product. And Miles Sanders hasn't been a 3-down back like ever outside of his first year. He had 50 catches in his first year. Then since then, 28, 26, 20 last year. Last year with 1,200 rushing yards and 11 total touchdowns, he was just the RB21 in points per game. So when we take away the efficiency of sort of what Jalen Hurts gave him last year and, you know, moving the ball down the field and getting touchdowns, you take that away, you're putting everything on this receiving role that he might or might not have. And even then, like, what's the payoff, right? It's probably a replaceable RB2 at best with Miles Sanders. So he's a pass for me. I think as well, there's a lot of concern. There's a lot of the issue that I think some people have is that these 3rd-down backs are kind of random, right? Like, we've seen like Travis Homer and DJ Dallas in Seattle be like guys out there often on like long down and distance and stuff. It wouldn't shock me. Yeah, J.D. McKissic. It wouldn't shock me at all if like Hubbard was that guy, or even Raheem Blackshear, or we're getting reports today Laviska Shenault's lining up out of the backfield. If they use Laviska Shenault as a 3rd-down back, it wouldn't shock me at all. Like, Miles Sanders is a little bit undersized. He's never been like this true bell cow. I know Deuce Staley's there, but I really don't want to hear it with the running back coach narratives. He just hasn't been good. I think there was also a stat that I saw. He was last among all running backs last year in yards per out run at 0.28. So he's not really an efficient catcher of the football. He hasn't really done it since his rookie year, and even then he was kind of inefficient with it. So I'm not drafting him at all. There's too many good wide receivers in that range. Again, that's like JSN, Lockett range. I'm taking those guys a ton. Dobbins range as well. I just can't get there. Pitts too.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because everybody, of course, the contract does speak volumes. 4 years, $25 million or whatever the heck Miles Sanders signed. But like you mentioned, the skill set kind of looks like that Kenneth Walker style slasher running back that won't contribute on 3rd downs. Chuba Hubbard was a lot better last year than I think people realize. This is a guy that averaged over 10 yards per target and about 4.9 yards per carry. So he's not going to get completely phased out, in my opinion. Miles Sanders is not a good enough talent to be able to completely phase out a 6'1", 210-pound running back working behind him in Chuba Hubbard, who's been with the team for 3 years. I just can't see it happening. Oddly enough, I've been getting some Chuba Hubbard in like round 16, round 17, just because I don't believe in Miles Sanders. And I think they're a lot closer in terms of talent level than people want to acknowledge between Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders.
People love to sleep on that Oklahoma State year, man. 2,094 rushing yards, 21 rushing touchdowns, 23 catches in that year, man. He was a dog. Dude, I think he could have came out as a redshirt sophomore that year, and he probably would have gotten drafted much higher than, 4th round or whatever. But, people sleep on Hubbard. He's a talented back.
Yeah, shout out the fellow Canadian with Chuba Hubbard over there. But we can move on to the next player, and a player that's getting taken higher in drafts. I talked about the 3rd overall pick on Underdog Fantasy. Now I'm going to have to talk about the 6th overall player off the board on Underdog Fantasy. The first tight end off the board, that's going to be Travis Kelce, tight end of the Kansas City Chiefs. Currently going off the board, like I said, 6th overall, which is just simply stemming from my structural issue with building around a tight end in the middle of the 1st in my drafts. I understand somebody's going to go in the comments, well, did you know Travis Kelce's wins over replacement was as high as anybody in fantasy football history last year, blah, blah, blah. All that nonsense. I get that. But at the end of the day, when I'm at the 6th overall pick, when I'm in the drafts, I got to be honest to you guys. When I'm seeing Travis Kelce's name, I'm not clicking him there. I'm clicking Stephon Diggs. I'm clicking Cooper Kupp. I'm clicking CeeDee Lamb. I'm clicking Bijan Robinson. I don't find myself clicking Travis Kelce because I can't pass on players at wide receiver and running back that I deem have legitimate 20-plus PPR point per game, league-winning level upside. If I want to take an early tight end, I would rather just wait till the early 3rd to grab a guy like Mark Andrews when I'm dealing with guys like Devonta Smith, T. Higgins, lesser projection players at that range. I'm more willing to take a guy in Mark Andrews who, if you compare his 2021 season to Travis Kelce's 2022 season, wasn't really far off. 154 targets that year for Mark Andrews, legitimate elite tight end 1, and now has a full offseason, getting that rapport back with Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson brought back on that big-time contract, and with Todd Monken coming in to potentially revamp that passing game, I would much rather just take, like I said, Mark Andrews at the early third rather than Travis Kelce at the 6th overall pick. I understand he's a Hall of Fame player. He's probably worth this type of range, but I would rather personally get him if he falls to 10th, 11th overall rather than spending that 6th overall pick, simply because, like I said, the running backs and wide receivers in this range are simply too good to pass up for me.
The issue with Kelce, too, is he's been the same bet every single year since Mahomes has been, Mahomes. And his price is just like an overreaction to what happened the year before. What last year we were taking him like middle of the second. Yeah. And he had a great year, and then he came back up. But the year before last year, it was like kind of a down year. Like his price just depends on whatever he did last year, and he's the same bet, but only riskier as he gets older. So I don't really think a fall off is really in store here. But he is a guy who's tough. 6th overall, you're paying a premium for a tight end here. Now I will say, we'll go a little bit later in the draft here. For my next fade, we have George Pickens. And I want to say, I love the prospect. I was all in on George Pickens. I loved it. And the issue is like, he wasn't great last year, and he's in a really tough offense for his skill set. So last year, in the rookie wide receiver report I do on my channel, 14.5% targets per out run was awful. 1.38 yards per out run, really bad. He had a worse PFF grade. He had a worse target per out run, yards per out run, and PFF grade than Sky Moore last year. George Pickens, really, really, really not good stuff. And now, he didn't have a spectacular year one. So it's like, I don't have a ton of like faith for like this crazy year two jump forward. And then you have the offense where you have a legit 27% target share guy in Deontay Johnson. You have Freiermuth. You have Najee Harris taking targets. And this is a guy last year who had the 3rd highest average depth of target, 15.6 yards down the field, while Kenny Pickett had 49.1% of his attempts last year in the 0 to 9 yard range, which was 4th highest in the NFL. Kenny Pickett, two-glove Kenny Pickett in the 20-degree weather in Pittsburgh is not going to get it 25 yards downfield for George Pickens. And you have a spot here where Matt Canada is just like continuously like just ramming his head into the wall with George Pickens, where George Pickens last year ran over 30% of his routes on go routes, which like Matt Harmon said on Reception Perception, that's absurd. It's an insane use of his skills. And the only routes that he was actually good at running last year were the downfield ones. So to me, it's like he's getting squeezed. You have Matt Canada just sort of running him as like a decoy. I just don't know how he smashes, right? Like I think that he's going to make some highlight plays. He's like a Mike Williams in that way, a Kenny Golladay. But it's really tough to see how he pays off in this massive way, especially when I have to draft him over like Quentin Johnston and Jahan Dotson and Jordan Addison and Mike Evans. Like it's really tough for me to get there.
It's funny for me because, like you said, even if a guy like Quentin Johnson maybe gets off to a slower start, maybe only commands, what'd you say Pickens' target share was last year? 15.3%, you said?
I didn't have his target share, but I think his ADOT's 15.3. I think his target share was probably like sub 20%. Or yeah, I think his targets per out run is what I pulled up, which I think I had him at like 14%. Yeah, 14.5% his targets per out run.
Yeah, so basically if Quentin Johnson produced, let's just say even a 15% target share, if the Chargers are throwing 700 times, we already touched about it on the last video. If the Chargers are throwing 700 plus times, that's going to equate to over 105 targets. Realistically, I just did the math off my head. But regardless, he's going to inherently be in a better situation from a volume standpoint than a guy like George Pickens, and yet they're currently going off the board in the similar ADP range. And that's being completely pessimistic that Quentin Johnson can't just go out there and command 18, 19, 20+% of the targets as a year one player going in the first round. I completely agree with you with George Pickens here. If I'm going to take an upside young wide receiver in this range who oddly enough is still a year or two younger than George Pickens himself, I'm going to take Quentin Johnson every single time.
Like they're having him run wind sprints out there, I kind of feel sorry for him, and it wouldn't shock me at all the type of dude that George Pickens is that like at a certain point he's just done. You know what I mean? Like running just nothing but downfield routes when Kenny Pickett can't do anything. And he had poor success rates on like the comebacks and the slants and stuff. Like I don't think that he's that type of, I don't think that he can sort of mold his game around Pickett. Like he kind of is what he is at this point. Pickett and Matt Canada is like the worst recipe possible for that skill set.
I can move on to my final fade here, and this pains me to do. And we talked about it off camera, so you guys, who's coming up, Ron, but pains me to list Chris Olave as a guy that I'm simply avoiding in drafts right now. Wide receiver 12, 19th overall player, a guy that I would feel comfortable with taking, the early to mid third round. It's just, When it comes to Chris Olave, I just can't pull the trigger on his name over some of the backs in that range. So we're talking Tony Pollard, Saquon Barkley, Nick Chubb, Jonathan Taylor for me, and I can't pull the trigger on his name over the elite league-winning quarterbacks in that range. A guy like Josh Allen, who prior to the UCL injury last year was averaging almost 28 points per game. Patrick Mahomes, who was averaging nearly 26 points per game with a, makeshift wide receiver core last year. Or potentially, Jalen Hurts, a guy who rushed in 13 rushing touchdowns in that breakout season, who finished as the quarterback one in points per game with over 25 points per game. So for me personally, I feel like those guys, with how much they move the needle at their positions, are just simply better bets than what Chris Olave represents. And the reason being is that I'm really worried about the Saints offense. I genuinely think right now that people are putting too much stock in the upgrade to Derek Carr. I talked about it with Corey on the wide receiver rankings video that he was completely off the Derek Carr train. I had to, give some credit, give some benefit of the doubt, because I still have Chris Olave higher ranked than what Corey does, but Chris Olave is my wide receiver 14 right now. I'm comfortable with him. Derek Carr objectively was as good, if not worse, than Andy Dalton this past year. Michael Thomas is coming back to this offense. Realistically, do we expect this offense to throw the ball over 550 times? Because guess what? Based off last year and based off the quarterback Derek Carr showed this past season, I'd put the under on 550. And if you're betting the under on 550 attempts, if you're betting the under on Chris Olave scoring 7+ passing touch or receiving touchdowns, because Derek Carr probably will only throw for 22, 23, 24, it's tough for me to see a way he completely blows this ADP out of the water. Can he pay off? Can he be a back-end wide receiver one, a guy that you want on all your dynasty teams, a guy that you want to build around moving forward, especially in dynasty, like I said? Absolutely. But for me, I don't see that way where he can pay off as the wide receiver 5 in points per game. And for that reason, give me Calvin Ridley, who I think will be able to do so.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I know you and Bush liked him a ton coming out as just kind of his skill set and his route running and everything. And now, and I said too, I was low on him beginning as well. I'm starting to come around, but I agree. Like something that I wrote down when I was talking through Olave in another video, I think a couple weeks ago, Dennis Allen worries me, man. He's a defensive guy. They had the 4th slowest neutral pace last year, 7th lowest pass attempts per game. The defense, somehow the defense is always decent in that Saints sort of defense with Cameron Jordan. Demario Davis, who they stole from my Jets, and he was awful on the Jets. He goes to the Saints, and he's like this all-pro linebacker. Marshawn Lattimore, of course. So they piece things together over there. But yeah, it's tough. I think the only thing I'd push back on Olave is that there's a little bit of that unknown, right? It's tough. Like a second-year player, there is that unknown where he could just be monstrous. But I do agree, he does have that he does have that profile where you question the upside a little bit. He does seem like kind of a possession wide receiver, but the targets per route run was so crazy last year, 26%. If that holds in any slight and his ADOT is still as high as it is, he could efficiently get his way to kind of wide receiver 1 type numbers. I agree though. I'm not going crazy with Olave. He is somebody that I like over Devonta Smith and T. Higgins, because I think at least he doesn't have somebody kind of weighing him down in front of him. So yeah.
I agree with you there on Devonta Smith. I have him a couple spots higher, but I keep coming back to the fact that with T. Higgins, it's we want to say, well, I mean, Devonta Smith and Chris Olave are commanding, 27, 28% of their team's targets respectively. T. Higgins only 23%, but at the same time, it's still Joe Burrow targets. It's still 650 plus pass attempts. It's still a guy that when he was fully healthy last year, when he played over 50% of the snaps last year, was giving you about 18 PPR points per game, which was among the likes of a guy like CeeDee Lamb, among the likes of a guy like AJ Brown. So for me personally, I would just take T. Higgins if I'm making a bet on an early 3rd round receiver. But like you said, it kind of feels like the late 2nd to mid 3rd round before Calvin Ridley comes off the board, in my opinion, kind of feels like the wide receiver dead zone, because you're missing out on guys like Devontae Adams, Amon St. Brown, all those guys above. And there's not much separation, in my opinion, between the Jalen Waddles, T. Higgins, Chris Olave's, Devonta Smith's, up until even like I said, Calvin Ridley's of the world. So for me personally, that's where I'm attacking my elite league winning quarterback. I'm attacking my Mark Andrews. I'm attacking my, if Tony Pollard slips or Ramondre Stevenson, I'm just taking those guys over a guy like Chris Olave, who may be able to pay off at ADP, but for me personally, can't smash it.
And I think from a macro standpoint, I'm there as well, where I'm notoriously the 0 RB guy. I'll push 0 RB, but I'm telling you, man, if you take a Devonta Smith or something, or a wide receiver with that profile in round 2, and you get 15 points per game from him, you're going to be pissed. Yeah. It's not going to be good, man. That's a profile you can get later on, 4, 5, 6, hammer him. I agree. I'm taking, I've actually been mixing in Chubb this year. You know, Pollard, of
So
course, JT, all of those guys, Saquon. So once those running backs are off the board, I like Olave in like the late second when he falls there. Now, I will say the guy I'm not drafting, and it absolutely pains me because he was somebody where I do this rookie wide receiver report in season where I kind of chart out, you know, targets per run, yards per run, PFF grade of all of these wide receivers. And I plugged in Chig Okonkwo at the end of the year, and man, Chig Okonkwo had a crazy year. Like he holds pace with a lot of these guys when it comes to targets per out run, yards per run, receiving grade. He had like an 80. I think he was like top 5 in receiving grade on PFF or something crazy like that. The yards per out run was crazy, all of that. But it's like, man, we're really projecting things. You know, he wasn't a full-time player last year. He didn't really produce a ton outside of when Treylon Burks missed games. And we're drafting him in a range right now where I have to take him over Dalton Kincaid. And I have to take him, you know, sometimes over Greg Dulcich. I prefer Rondale, and I know we're getting into a pretty ugly range here, but I prefer Rondale more to him. I prefer Warren and Tank Bigsby and John Mingo and Rashee Rice over Okonkwo. Like, if he was more of a flyer, I'd be there, but I'd rather just take like Laporta later, you know, like Laporta and Michael Mayer and even, dude, if you want to get nasty with it, like, dude, if you want to,
Ferguson.
Like, Noah Fant, Jelani Woods, like, I'll take all of those guys, price adjusted, kind of over Chig Okonkwo. Then, like, the talent is there, but I'm a little bit skeptical. Like, this was a day 3 pick. Admittedly, my prospect model did not like Jonnu Smith. He's not a high ADOT guy, so it's not a sticky way of earning efficiency, right? He's like George Kittle, but he's not as freaky athletic as a George Kittle. He doesn't have that crazy agility score and like the burst and everything. Like, his combine numbers weren't crazy. He's a little bit undersized. He's not somebody I want to bet on anything crazy. And this is going to be a low volume pass offense. He's going to be behind DeAndre Hopkins, likely behind Treylon Burks in terms of targets. He's going to kind of just get what's left over for them. And when the volume is already super low, I think it's a pretty risky bet to just sort of bet on the efficiency of like a year 2 tight end. I love him in Dynasty. I think down the line, Chig Okonkwo could be a guy, but it's really tough.
It's just tough in redraft. I agree with you. I'll quickly brush up on it as well. It's tough for me in redraft to completely have faith that a guy who averaged less than 3 targets per game in the entirety of the season last year is suddenly going to be this 5.5, 6, 6.5 target per game tight end, which you basically need for them to even be relevant. When DeAndre Hopkins coming into the fold, he was averaging less than 3 targets per game when Treylon Burks missed time last year, when the corpse of Robert Woods was on the field last year. And now you add DeAndre Hopkins. Now you add another full offseason for Treylon Burks to develop into that wide receiver too. I simply can't project him to have this elite level target share, target earning type of role on an offense that I don't think is going to be very good. So for me personally, like you kind of said, I'm not really taking Chig Okonkwo a lot in my redraft leagues. More willing to take him in Dynasty because I do believe the efficiency of the talent could be there, especially if he slips in terms of opportunity cost. But again, Greg Dulcich, Dalton Kincaid, even a guy like Dalton Schultz, I would rather take over a guy like Chig Okonkwo at this point. So, but either way, I appreciate you for hopping on the channel, Ron. If you guys enjoyed this video and got some value from it, make sure you leave a like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. While you're here, make sure you check out flockfantasy.com. Using the promo code FSC will get you 30% off of your subscription to the site and complete access to everything we have going on at the site. All of mine and Corey's rankings, trade value charts, any study we do, along with priority access for future Dynasty Decisions episodes by using our code FSC specifically. If you sign up annually right now, you can get a free Zoom consultation with myself or Corey, and we can talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. Dynasty strategy, live Dynasty decisions, prepping for your rookie drafts, advice for your redraft league, or even a consultation while you're drafting in your home league. Whatever it is, we'll be happy to talk about. Also, of course, all ADP reference in today's video comes from Underdog Fantasy. If you guys want to get some skin in the game, if you notice an interesting trend, maybe some guys that you do not want to touch on Underdog right now and you want to take advantage of by getting some skin in the game, make sure you go to Underdog Fantasy. 100% match back on your first deposit up to $100 if you use promo code FSC. And by using code FSC, you will get access to our redraft rankings manifesto and cheat sheet, as well as our weekly rankings for the 2023 season once they come out. But with that being said, both of those codes are linked in the description. Peace out. Enjoy your Monday.